friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using the brand new Berry Rainy Day set from Lawn Fawn. So I've stamped the images I'll be using in Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock, and I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm starting with my bears, and I want them to look like a little family, so I am going to be coloring them all using the same shades. The colors I chose for them are E43, E44, and E47. This brown has a bit of a gray tone to it, so I just feel like it really does well for different critters like bears and sloths and things like that. It just has a bit of a more natural fur tone, I feel like. So I started with that E47 and laid in some shadows. I'm doing a central light source on this little bear's face. I like to keep their faces nice and light. So since she is facing forward, I'm going to have that highlight in the very center of her face. So I'm putting the shadows on the outside edges. I'm also putting a little bit on the bottom of her hands and on the inside of her legs where her raincoat would be casting a shadow, and then blending out with the E44 and then using the E43 for the highlight. So I'm going to fill in any of that white space that remains, except for the muzzle area. I wanted to do that in a different tone. And then I decided to go over my image with another layer. That's something I really like to do. It just smooths out that blend and increases the saturation. A lot of times I'll do it off screen, but this time I decided to leave it in so you could see how I did that. I just did it on her face because that was the area that I felt needed it the most. It's usually the larger areas that can really use that second layer. So then I'm moving on to the little cubs, and like I said, I wanted them to look like a little family, like a mama bear out with her two cubs. So I'm going to use the same shades, except I'm going to do my shading in a little bit of a different way. I'm doing the shadows for this one on the left hand side since he's facing toward the right. He also has his face upturned toward the light, so I wanted to keep his muzzle area nice and bright. And then for the second cub, I'm going to reverse the shadows to the right hand side since he's facing toward the left. So again, just starting with that darkest shade, that E47, and working my shadows in and then blending out with the E44, using that E43 to create a nice highlight on the face so you can really see their facial features. And you know, that's what gives them that personality. So I want to make sure that you can see their eyes clearly. And then I'm going to use the E41 and E42 for the muzzles. So I'm just going to go quickly and do all three of them at once since it's a super small area, starting with that E42 and then filling in with the E41. And then I did go back and add a bit more of that E42 just to have a bit more definition there, and then blended that out once again. Then I went in with R11 and R20 to give them some rosy cheeks. It's a little bit tricky to get it to show up on these darker fur-toned bears. So I did start with the lighter shade, the R11, and then use that to kind of push that color away so that I could have a little space to add that shading in. And I added in the R21 as well to just make it a bit darker so that you could actually see it. So I used that and then the R20, and then kind of went back around the R20 with the R11 once again. Then I'm moving on to some yellows, and I chose Y11, Y13, and Y15. And I'm going to do one of the sections on the umbrella. I'm adding a little shading on each side of that little wedge with the Y15, blending out with the Y13 and then using the Y11 to fill in. And I did go back and do a second layer of the darkest two shades. And I decided to do the little bear cubs raincoats in this yellow combo as well. So once again, I'm starting with that darkest, the Y15, and just shading like I did on the body with the shadows on the left-hand side, and then anywhere that the fabric would be overlapping, like where the hood and the back of the jacket meet, and like the underside of the sleeve where it's hanging over like the back part of the jacket, anything like that. And then I did the boots to match. Then I went in with my second layer, and I thought I had the Y15 again, but it turned out I only had the Y13. So once I realized that, I went back and grabbed that Y15 and laid that in again, just to really give it that bit of definition. I like a lot of contrast in my coloring, and in order for that to happen, you need a wide difference between your darkest dark and your lightest light. So then I'm going to do the second little bear cubs jacket to match. I know when my boys were little, I always liked to dress them in matching outfits, or maybe like something similar but in a different shade or something like that. I just think it's so cute to see siblings when they're really small, having that matchy look. So I thought that would be fun since these cubs are pretty young. I would say they're toddler cubs from the size of them. So I'm going to finish off this second little one. This one is the little girl in my mind, but it can be whatever you want it to be. And then I wanted to do kind of like a peach combo, and I'm going to do Mama Bear's raincoat in that. So I went with YR00, YR01, and YR02. So I'm starting with that YR02 and adding a little bit of shading where her head is kind of casting a shadow on the neck, also on the undersides of the arms. I'm giving the little pockets a bit of definition as well, and then the bottom corners of her jacket and where the front two pieces kind of overlay each other. And then I'm going to do her boots to match as well. So I blended out with the YR01, and now I'm filling in with the YR00, and just making sure that everything is nicely blended and I don't have any harsh lines. And then I will, of course, go back and do a second layer on her jacket as well. You guys can let me know if you enjoy seeing that second layer. A lot of times I do edit it out of the video and just let you know that I did it, just because I don't want to waste your time. But I know some people have said it's helpful to see the entire process start to finish without kind of skipping over parts. So you guys let me know what you think about that. So once I'm done with her jacket, I'm going to do another section of the umbrella. So I'm using that YR02 to color it the same way I did the yellow, with, the shadows on either end and the highlight on the rounded part in the middle, because that is where the light would hit, and then doing a second layer with just the darkest two shades. And then I went back to my Y13 for her jacket buttons. So next I wanted to add in some greens, but I didn't want it to be like a super limey green. I wanted it to be spring tones, but more muted spring tones, since we're just coming out of winter, and where I am, we're not out of winter at all. I mean, it's snowing as I speak. As I'm doing this voiceover. So winter is still here for a long time for me, but I'm so over it and so ready for spring. But I wanted it to be that transition part, before you get to those really bright, fresh tones of spring, kind of easing your way in from the darker tones of winter. So I went with the pastel shades, but just more muted tones. So I went with G40, G43, and G46 and did my two adorable little frogs. I absolutely adore those tiny little images. I think they're so sweet. And then I'm going to do another section of the umbrella. This time I'm only going to do the shading on the inner edge because you can't really see the outer edge. You only see the part where it's bowed out. And then I'm going to bring in a blue for the opposite wedge. And I chose B41 and B45 for that. For the final section of the umbrella, I wanted to do a turquoise, so I went with BG10, BG11, and BG13. So it's more of like an aqua, like a pale turquoise. So I started with the BG13 and filled in with the BG11, and then the BG10, and then did my second layer with those darkest two shades again. And then I'm going to use those shades to also color in all of the water. So I'm just going to work my way across all of these images, just doing a few of them at a time, adding that BG13 first to kind of accentuate the edges of the puddle and all of the little splash marks and things like that. I think those splash marks are really fun and creative. I love the movement that they have in the way that they're drawn, and I think they could be really fun for a lot of different things. Maybe like with the Rub Dub Dub set, you can have like water splashing out of the tub, or just lots of like rainy day scenes, or even like ocean scenes, anything with you know, something that's kind of bursting out of the water, like the Loch Ness Monster from Lovable Legends. Lots of stuff like that, I think, or the Kraken image would be also really cool. I think those are really fun, and I can't wait to see what other ways I can use them on different scenes. So I'm just going to keep working my way around, starting with that BG13 and then blending out with the BG11, and then mainly using the BG10 on that bottom part of each of those little splash marks. And then I've got one final puddle up there at the top. I wanted it to look super wet and rainy, so I wanted, you know, a puddle to be like all the way across the scene. So that's why I decided to stamp it out 3 times. I left the underside of the umbrella for last because I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do with it. I didn't know if I wanted to like bring those same colors down or just color it in a different tone, but I ended up just using the BG11 and the BG10, and then I'm going to use N3 and N5 for the little metal bar, and then the top and the handle. So I used the N3 for the bar and then used both of those shades for the little knob and the handle. And then I took a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and just went over the eye of my one little bear cub that has his eyes open, and then also the 2 little frogs, just a tiny little dot for those guys, just to make them nice and bright and shiny. And then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. For the background, I'm going to take a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock, and I'm going to add some Distress Oxide ink using tumbled glass, and I'm going to bring that down from the top and down the sides, and concentrate that color on the corners and the edges, and basically leave the center white for now. I wanted it to be nice and bright. I am going to be adding some more detail over top with a stencil in just a moment, but I wanted to have some initial color in the background first before I got to that. So I'm just gently smoothing that color on. I'm not using a lot of pressure as I wanted to keep it pretty light. But I did want to have a bit more contrast on the very edges. So I grabbed some Peacock Feathers Distress Oxide ink, and this time I'm using super light pressure. Like I'm just barely touching that blending tool down to the cardstock, so that I get just a little bit of that turquoise shade that's going to match the coloring that I did. but I don't want to have like super bold color. I want to keep it in this muted pastel palette. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to grab a little piece of Post-it tape and I'm going to mask off the bottom of the card. I want it to look like a sidewalk that has gotten just completely flooded with water. So I'm going to start from the corners and then also on that piece of tape and blend downwards. Also leaving the bottom center light just to kind of mimic the top part and almost like reflect the sky a bit there. I will add a bit more color just so it's, you know, separate, and then I can peel off that mask and you can see how that's looking. I'm going to replace the mask covering that part up. It is wet so the tape doesn't want to stick, so I just tuck it down behind the panel and that holds it down. And then I'm going to grab the brand new Rainy Day stencil and I'm going to continue using that Peacock Feathers ink and blend on some raindrops. So I'm just holding that stencil down nice and tight. You can definitely tape it down if you prefer to do that. I'm too lazy for that, and it doesn't stick well to this Waffle Flower Mini Media Mat anyway, so I just hold it in place, and if I need to readjust like I just did, I can do that. So I'm following the same pattern that I did with kind of like the upside down U shape, and then for the center I went back to my tumbled glass and I'm going to do that one in the middle so it continues with the darker color on the outside edges and the lighter color in the center. And I felt like I'd missed a little bit in that top left corner, so I'm just going to put my stencil back down, make sure that I get it lined up straight again, and then add a little bit of color to that top corner. And then I will set this panel aside to dry. I'll just peel off that mask first so you can see the entire thing. Then I'll take the largest of the small stitched rectangle stackables. I have my large and small together on one magnetic sheet. I'm going to trim this panel down with that so I get that nice stitching detail on the outside edges. And then I'm going to grab the new Flower Market 6x6 Petite Pack, and I'm going to choose a piece of pattern paper from that. I'm using this aqua stripe. So I'll tear that out and I'm going to trim that one down with the largest of the large stitch rectangle stackables. So again, I have that nice stitching detail. Everything is going to match really nicely. And then I want to create a sentiment, so I'm just using the leftover piece of cardstock and I'm stamping down in Lawn Fawn Peacock ink. And I'm doing a two-part sentiment. So the one says, have a happy day, and the second part says, rain or shine. And I used my Twiddler's Nook pressure pal to help me get even pressure, so I get a nice, bold sentiment. Then I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using a piece of Lawn Fawn Mermaid cardstock, which I scored and folded to a standard A2 size card. And on the inside, I'm going to stamp the other little bear and some splash marks and the little frog and make a splash. So now I'm ready to start assembling. I'm going to adhere my pattern paper down to cover the entire card front. So I'm just making sure that that is lined up nice and straight with all four sides, and then I'll smooth that down into place. And then I've added foam tape to the back of my focal panel so I have a bit of dimension. I'll peel off those release papers, center that on the card, and press that down in place as well. And then I can bring in my images to start decorating. I always like to start with my largest image first, but in this case I'm just going to use her as a placeholder because I want some of the smaller images to actually be behind her. So I'm just going to set that mama bear in the middle where I want her to go eventually, and then I can start adhering down some of these smaller images like the little puddle and the two splash marks that this sweet little baby bear is going to be jumping in. And I just love this set because I'm firm believer in letting kids get messy and play. Yeah, it's a pain to clean up later, but kids should be kids, and you know, that's how you discover the world and enjoy things, is by exploring and getting your hands dirty, and in this case your feet dirty or whatever, you know. So yeah, I just love this scene. I was absolutely that mom that let my kids jump in puddles. So I'm going to kind of mimic it on the left hand side, except I'm just going to use one of the splash marks there, and then I'll add the other little baby bear, kind of reaching for Mama Bear's hand. And then the third little puddle I'm actually going to put under Mama, because yeah, she's having some fun too. They deserve to all get to play and splash together. So I'm going to give her a little bit of a splash mark behind her. She might not be doing it quite as vigorously as the babies, but she's stomping her foot in there, having a good time too. So then I can see exactly where I want her and adjust those little puddles and splash marks as needed. And then I'm going to go ahead and glue her down now, because now I know exactly where she's going and have everything that needs to be behind already adhered. So I'll go ahead and get her how I want her on the card. I gave her just a little bit of a skew to the left just to make her look a little more whimsical. And then finally I've got my little sweet frogs, so I'm going to put one on the left and one on the right, so everything is nice and balanced. So for my sentiment, I die cut both of those strips using the smallest of the everyday sentiment banners. So I am going to adhere both of those kind of stacked over on the left hand side. I just wanted it to be a little bit different than usual, so that's why I decided to do the two-part sentiment. So I was just kind of figuring out the placement of those pieces before I adhere them. So I'm going to trim those down a bit, and I almost added it going sideways, which I think would have been cute too, but would have been harder to use the stack. So I trimmed those down, added a tiny little bit of foam tape to the far left of that banner where it would overlap the part of the card that is not supported by the focal panel. So everything will be nice and flat and smooth, and I don't have to worry about it like bending when I mail it. And then I'm going to add the second part right underneath. So the whole sentiment says, "Have a happy day, rain or shine." I think this is a great sentiment for many different occasions. It could be like first day of school, first day at a new job. It could be a birthday card. It could be a lot of different things. And I think it's nice to have some of those all occasion cards in your stash, because, you know, you don't always know what occasions are going to come up, and then you have something already made that you can grab, and you can personalize the message on the inside for the specific person that you're giving it to. So I added a bit of Stardust Stickles to all of the water just to give them a bit of glitz. Almost added it to the umbrella, but decided to just leave it on the water. So there you can see how that catches the light. And I'll give you another peek at the inside. And I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I had so much fun playing with these brand new stamps. I think these are just so adorable. I already can't wait to use them again. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. If you're interested in any of these products, I'll have everything listed and linked for you below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.